Stepney the Bluebell Engine by the Reverend W. Audrey. Read and adapted by Joshua Boston. Bluebells of England. One day, Thomas the Tank Engine was feeling very happy. His blue coat shone in the sun, he was right on time, and all around his branch line the countryside seemed prettier than ever before. Beep, beep! Good morning, Percy, he whistled. My branch is the pride of the line, wouldn't you agree? Yes, Thomas, of course, but what, Percy? Out with it. Well, there is another engine with a famous branch line, too. Who? Where? His name's Stepney. He's far away, but Sir Topham Hatt says he's going to visit us. When? Oh, someday. And Percy trundled away. Meanwhile, far away, a golden terrier engine was puffing steadily along his line. It isn't very long, and that made him feel a little sad. What's wrong, old boy? Asked his driver. Everybody's been so kind to me on this railway, sir, replied the engine. But this line is so short, and I sure do miss a good long run. His driver and fireman understood. You know, Stepney, we feel just the same way. That evening, the driver had exciting news. Guess what, Stepney? Sir Topham Hatt from the Northwestern Railway on the Island of Sodor has invited us to visit the other engines on his railway. Our controller agreed. It'll be a really long run to get there. Oh, thank you, sir, sighed Stepney. They set off the next morning. By now, a lot of the other engines were talking about Stepney. He runs a famous branch line. Did you know that? Said Percy. Thomas was feeling a little jealous. Pah! He may be famous, but my branch is the first on the line. Everyone knows that, too. And he huffed away to fetch his coaches. Percy's excitement couldn't be contained any longer. He began to sing a little tune. The bluebells are coming, oh ho, ho ho, the bluebells are coming, oh ho. If you must sing, Percy, grumbled Douglas. Can't you singing done? Anyway, our song is about campbells. And mine's about bluebells. Then it's daft. Bluebells are flowers. Flowers can't come. They grow. My song isn't daft. Percy was indignant. It is then. I can't fight about the bluebells. We have a song called the Bluebells of Scotland. But, said Percy triumphantly, the bluebells of England are different. They're engines. And Stepney, who is one of them, is coming with his controller. Didn't you listen? Percy went on severely. To Sir Topham Hatt telling us all about it? I was away. Oh dear. I couldn't understand it all. But engines on the other railway aren't safe now. Their controllers are cruel. They don't like engines anymore. They put them on damp, cold sidings. And then... Percy nearly sobbed. They cut them up. You're right there, agreed Douglas. If I hadn't escaped, I would have been cut up too. It's all because of young diesels. They're all devils, he added fiercely. Fair play, Douglas, reminded Percy. Some diesels are nice. Look at Rusty and Daisy. Maybe so, answered Douglas. I'll never trust one myself. But what I cannot understand is all your blathering about the bluebells. Well, the bluebells are kind people who want to save engines. They've made a place in England called the Bluebell Railway. Engines can escape there and be safe. Like me when I arrived here. Yes, Percy went on, just like that. If they are old or ill, a fitter makes them well. They can have their own special colors, all the coal and water they need, and pull trains, too. Oh, that's broad hearing, said Douglas with feeling. Sir Topham Hatt says Stepney was the first engine to escape there, so he's invited him to visit us and bring his controller. But, objected Douglas, what about young diesels? Might they catch him on the way? We thought so too, said Percy. But Sir Topham Hatt says there's no danger of that. Stepney's a match for any diesel. Besides, his controller will take care of him. Aye, he's a brave engine for all that, said Douglas admiringly. Fancy fighting his way through all those diesels just to see us. Look, squeaked Percy. The station is crowded. Silly. How can I look unless I be a corkscrew? Why haven't they all come? There's no train yet. But Percy was wrong. The signal dropped, and from far away they heard an engine whistle. A gleam of golden yellow shone through the bridge girders. Here he comes, yelled Douglas. Beep, beep, boop, boop, beep, beep. The two engines whistled excitedly in welcome. Beep, beep, whistled Stepney, as with passengers and people waving and cheering, he steamed proudly through the junction on the last stage of his long journey. Stepney's Special. The next day, Stepney was talking to Edward about his adventure on how he joined the Bluebell Railway. So I tried very hard, but I couldn't work properly, and they put me on a siding. I stayed there for days and days. Other engines were there too. I was afraid. I'd have been frightened too, said Edward. But then some workmen came and mended me, and even gave me a coat of paint. I couldn't understand it until my driver came, and he was very pleased. Stepney, you lucky old engine, he said. You've been saved. The Bluebell Railway has bought you. What a lovely surprise, smiled Edward. Have they saved other engines besides you? He asked. Oh, yes, answered Stepney. You'd like our Bluebell and Primrose. They're twin terriers, he chuckled. It's like they're two peas. They only had numbers at first. Bluebell is 323 and Primrose is 27. They were very pleased when our controller gave them names. Some say he was wrong to do it. It certainly made him cocky. But they do work hard, and I think our controller was right. All engines ought to have names. Yes, agreed Edward. It's most important. And that is why, Stepney continued, we've given names to our 488 and 2650. But our controller doesn't know. It's a secret. Don't tell him, will you? Of course not, smiled Edward. They're both very pleased about it, because now they feel part of the family. We call 488 Adams after his designer, you know. He's a lovely engine, a Southwestern from Devon. He can stroll away with any load he's given. Crumford, who is 2650, has been pulling cars up high peaks in Derbyshire. He's tough, is Crumford. He had to be for that job. Captain Baxter's tough too, Stepney went on, and rather rude. But he's worked at a quarry, and you know what that does to an engine's languages and manners. I do indeed, said Edward gravely. He's a good soul, really, said Stepney. I like him. We both miss our work with freight cars. He paused. I oughtn't to say this, he went on, after everyone has been so kind. But our line is so short, and I never really have gotten any good runs now. I miss them dreadfully. Never mind, smiled Edward. Perhaps you'll get some while you're here. I hope you meet Thomas, too. You both have branch lines to be proud of. Stepney said goodbye to Edward and then returned to the big station to help Duck shunt coaches in the yards. They were soon great friends, and they worked happily together all afternoon. At last, Thomas arrived with Annie and Clarabelle. Sorry, can't talk. It's time for my last branch line train. Mustn't be late. His train's tail lamps were hardly out of sight when the engines heard shouting at the station. Moments later came the alarm. Stop all trains! Hello, said Duck. I wonder what's up. Presently, the night duty shunter came to the shed. The bell in the cabin on the branch line rang once, then 5, pause, 5. That means to shunt to allow the following train to pass. The signalman was puzzled. He telephoned control. A special, is it? Oh, I see. Thomas was impatient. He and his passengers grumbled dreadfully. "Why are we waiting? My passengers are being delayed." "Sorry, Thomas," said his driver, knowing that there was no help for it. "We're being shunted to allow another train to pass." Soon they heard an unfamiliar puffing sound. Express headlamps swayed and twinkled, and there was Stepney pulling one coach looming in the station lights. He slowed to exchange tablets, whistled a greeting, then gathered speed and disappeared into the night. "Well, bust my boiler," said Thomas the Tank Engine. Next morning he was still fuming. "Shunted, and on my own branch too. It's a disgrace." Stepney pulled up alongside. "I'm sorry," he explained. "I was a special." "Why?" "An important passenger arrived just as you left. He said he must get home. He ordered a special train, and Doc kindly let me take it. We had a splendid run. No record-breaking, of course, but, finished Thomas modestly, "it can make an engine nervous not to know the line." "Exactly," put in Stepney. "You're such an expert." Thomas, flattered, felt much better. He couldn't be cross anymore, and began telling Stepney all about his branch line. Train stops play. Stepney the Bluebell Engine was busy talking to the other engines. Even though it was his very first visit to their railway, he was having a splendid time. "You're very lucky engines," he said. "Your line has got everything. It's long enough to give you a good run, and you have plenty of passengers. Then you have a quarry, a mine, and some factories, so you need plenty of cars. Cars are fun," he went on wistfully. "I miss them on our line." Percy looked surprised. All the engines thought cars were trouble. "You're welcome to take some of mine this morning," he said, "but you better ask driver first." So they asked permission, and when their drivers agreed, the two engines set off to collect them. Thomas and Toby were speechless. Stepney took his cars to the harbor, picked up a load of empties, and started back. On the way, they were stopped by a signal near a cricket field, where a match had just started. "Good," said the driver. "We can watch the game." Presently, some fielders came towards them and waved. "Could you move, please?" they asked. "Your last few cars are behind the bowler's arm." "Sorry," smiled the driver. "Will this do?" And he moved Stepney forward till he stood under the signal. The cricketers shouted their thanks, and play started again. Then there was trouble. The batsman hit the ball out, and soon a skya towered towards the train. "Clunk!" went the signal. "Thump!" went the ball as it fell into a car. But neither the driver or fireman heard it. They were too busy. "Stop!" yelled the fieldsmen, but Stepney's noisy starting drowned their shouts. Come along," he puffed to the cars and left the frantic fieldsmen behind. "Our one and only ball!" cried the players sadly. 4 players piled into an ancient car. "Wake up, Caroline," they said. "The chase is on." Caroline coughed crossly, reluctantly came to life, and they rolled out onto the road. Stepney wasn't hurrying. He had just crossed the river when Caroline came up behind. "Toot, toot," she wailed. Road and rail ran side by side. The cricketers waved and shouted, but they were too far away for the firemen to recognize them or hear clearly what they said. They completely misunderstood. "If those jokers want a race," said the driver, "they can have one. Faster, Stepney, faster!" He advanced his regulator, and Stepney drew ahead. Poor Caroline wasn't happy. She rattled along at twice her usual speed. "Master shouldn't treat me like this," she grumbled. "This pace is too hot for my system. It'll fuse all my circuits." Suddenly, Stepney was nowhere to be seen. "Hurrah!" exclaimed Caroline. "That silly train has run into a hole, so we can't catch it. Now master will have to be sensible and go home." But her driver didn't go home. Caroline nearly boiled with fury as she was pounded on up a steep hill and down to the station on the other side. Stepney had already shunted the cars when Caroline cluttered in. His crew were going off duty. "We need our ball back," said the cricketers, and explained what had happened. The driver and fireman were surprised. They all went and looked in all the cars and found the ball nestled in some straw in the third car from the van. "We found it!" cried a player. "We're very sorry," the driver said. "Oh, you couldn't help it," replied the player. "Now we must get back quickly." "That's just it," said the driver. "You'll never be quick in Caroline. She looks worn out." And she was. "Wait a minute," the driver said. "I've got an idea." He spoke to the station master and the signalman, and they all agreed on a plan. Soon they had rolled Caroline onto a flatbed with a brake van coupled behind. The cricketers crowded inside, and Stepney pulled the train back to the playing field. They reached it in no time. Everyone enjoyed watching the game. Stepney watched from a siding while his driver, fireman, and conductor sat in a pavilion. There were no more lost balls, and the game was played to an exciting finish. Even Caroline was pleased. She doesn't think trains silly now. "Well, their use is," she says. "They can save the wear and tear on a poor car's wheels." Bowled out. Stepney's visit to Sir Topham Hatt's railway was soon coming to an end. "We shall miss you," said Sir Topham Hatt. Then he turned his attention to all the engines. "My railway is very busy, and I'm pleased with each and every one of you. But you still need help. A diesel is all that's available, so please try to do your best to avoid any disturbances." "What does that mean?" asked Duck. "That means this diesel is difficult," said James. And he was. The diesel was a big green Class 40. He surveyed the shed.
"Not bad,"
he said.
"I've seen worse. At least you're all clean."
The engines gaped.
"It's not your fault,"
he went on.
"but Sir Topham Hatt should scrap you and get engines like me. A fill of oil, a touch on the starter, and I'm off. No bother, no waiting. They'll have to fuss around you for hours before you're ready."
The engines were furious. They found their voices, and an inspector had to come and stop the noise. Early next morning, the engines held an indignation meeting around the turntable. "Disgraceful," rumbled Gordon. "Disgusting," said James. "Despicable," stuttered Henry. "To say such things to us," burst out Donald and Douglas. "It's to teach him a lesson we'd be wanting. Now how do we do it?" No one really had any good ideas. At last, they all went to work except for Duck and Stepney. "Never mind," said Duck. "We'll be sure to think of something." "We'll have to be quick then," warned Stepney. But their chance came sooner than expected. The diesel purred comfortably. He was being warmed up well before time. An inspector watched the fitter making adjustments. The wind tugged at the inspector's hat. The fitter replaced the air intake cover. "Okay, mate," he said. The diesel was ready. He saw his coaches waiting at the platform. He rolled proudly towards them.
"Look at me, Duck and Stepney,"
he purred.
"Now I'll show you something."
Then it happened. He advanced a few yards, then suddenly coughed, faltered, choked, and stopped. Meanwhile, the inspector had seen nothing of this. He was looking for his hat. "Can we help you at all?" asked Duck and Stepney sweetly. The diesel seethed with baffled fury as they pushed him back to the shed. "My hat!" exclaimed the inspector as the cavalcade went by. "You sucked it through your air intake." Bother your hat, said Sir Topham Hatt crossly. The train is due out in 10 minutes. You'll have to take it, Duck. Duck looked doubtful. May I help him, sir, please? Asked Stepney. Duck felt much better. Sir Topham Hatt was pleased too. Certainly, Stepney. Thank you, sir. I'd like to have a good long run on my last day here. Sir Topham Hatt then went away almost cheerfully to make the arrangements. The engines and their crews made careful plans. A good start is everything on a job like this, warned Stepney. So as they backed down, Duck and Stepney dropped sand on the rails, rolling it firm with their wheels. Soon the engines were ready. Both controllers were there to see them off. Gordon will take over from halfway, said Sir Topham Hatt, so get the train there. Never mind about being late. Good luck. Don't worry, sirs, smiled Stepney. We'll get there, and be early, too. Both engines stood waiting, sizzling with excitement, ready and eager to be off. At last, the conductor blew his whistle and waved his green flag. The engines dug their wheels into the sand and gave a mighty heave. Come on, puffed Duck, while Stepney barked excitingly in front. Moving carefully over the points, they reached the open line. Now for a sprint, said Stepney. I'm ready when you are, puffed Duck. Faster and faster they went, till their wheels were turning at such speed that their side rods were merely blurs. Under clear signals, they whizzed through Edward Station and charged at Gordon's Hill beyond. The engines felt the drag of their 15 coaches here. It was very hard work. But once over the top, the last 10 miles were plain running, and they swept into the big station in fine style. Hello, you're early, said Gordon. That's one the headlamp for old Diesel. Have you heard the latest? He laughed. The Diesel sucked the inspector's hat into his air pipe. That's why he broke down. James says he's sick as boiler sludge and soaking in the shed. That serves him right for saying we're out of date. And still laughing, Gordon puffed away. Everyone was sad when Stepney had to go the next day. All the engines who could came to see him off. Sir Topham Hatt made a speech, and so did Stepney's controller. Donald and Douglas made everyone sing Auld Lang Syne, and then Stepney and his controller puffed off to a chorus of cheers and whistles. You're always welcome on my Bluebell Railway, Stepney called out as he left. Until we meet again, Bluebells forever! And everyone cheered. Goodbye, Stepney. Come again. Goodbye. Goodbye. But what about the Diesel? He had slipped away the night before while no one was looking. He said goodbye to no one. But he left two things behind. The rather nasty smell of bad manners and a battered bowler hat.